Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our thoughts for today. I wonder if you would class yourself as a confident person. How do you feel when it comes to facing the future or even the next hour? Where do we get our confidence from? Now, the self-help books loved by Bridget Jones suggest that confidence should come from within. But I would suggest that there's a much better place to look. And this morning we're continuing our series on the character of David. After looking last week at David being chosen by God, we come to the famous story of David and Goliath. But what has this story to do with confidence, be it yours, mine, or anyone else's? If we look carefully at David throughout this story, we see how confidence runs throughout it. And we see this confidence rising in at least 4 ways. There's confidence despite circumstances, despite criticism. There's confidence that comes from an experience of God. And there's the confidence in the power of God. And so for each one of us today, there is a message about confidence. Our scripture reading is 1 Samuel 17, verses 2 to 51. But first of all, let's look at this idea of confidence despite circumstances. The story is told to emphasize the difference between Goliath and David. On the one hand, we have Goliath, the massive Philistine warrior with his impressive and seemingly impenetrable armor and his boundless self-confidence. He takes his stand in front of the Philistine army and he lays down the challenge to the Israelites to find someone who is prepared to fight him. No wonder that when the Israelites saw him, they were terrified. But on the other hand, there is David. David, the youngest and least important of 8 sons. He's tending his sheep back in the fields of Bethlehem. While his brothers are away at battle, David had to stay home. So I think we can imagine how unimportant he felt. And yet, as David is sent on an errand to take supplies to his brothers, we can get a sense also of his confidence, because he runs to greet his brothers. Now, war was a dangerous business, and yet David appears to show little fear as he stands chatting with his brothers. It must all seem so unlikely to him, and yet he doesn't seem fazed. It's an unlikely situation, but actually he knows an unlikely God. And as we saw last week, God had shown himself to be a God who doesn't obey the world's rules, who doesn't always go for the oldest or the strongest. God is a God who notices unlikely people and chooses them. So it doesn't worry David that it all seems a bit unlikely his being there. He knows an unlikely God. In verses 25 to 30, we see where the professional soldiers get cross. Goliath comes out again. He does his posturing. He reminds the Israelites of what's at stake in this battle. The Israelites' reaction is just to think about how grateful the king would be to actually whoever it was that managed to defeat Goliath. And I guess here's where David's ears prick up. The defeatist attitude of the army. He can't believe that they're letting themselves be intimidated by this man who doesn't even have God on his side. Perhaps as a result, we can see why Eliab has had enough. Bad enough that his squirt of a brother is there at all. But now he's criticising his own bravery. And he tears into David and accuses him of being one of those people who sticks around at an accident in the hope of seeing some blood. And David's words are classic younger brother. He can't get anything right. But the key thing to notice is that David doesn't retreat and go home. In fact, he carries on talking to other soldiers, perhaps exploring what plans there are to attack Goliath. Now, the circumstances seem against him. His own brother has gone for him, yet he carries on. So again, where does this confidence come from? Is it sheer stubbornness? I don't think so. Just look at where David's vision is. It's not on what other people think of him. If that had been the case, he would simply have given up and gone home. What drives him is a passion to see God's name honoured. He has a concern for how God is seen by other nations, not for his own reputation. Now, we all like to be liked. We all want other people to think well of us. It boosts our own confidence. It's the secret around which all marketing works. But as Christians, we need to realise that our vision needs to be elsewhere. Praise from other people is only skin deep. What matters is a focus on God that can withstand criticism of us and our motives. When the need arises to stand up for being a follower of Jesus, even when it goes against the crowd, it hurts. It may only be teasing, but it hurts. In verses 31 to 39, we look at the confidence that comes through having an experience of God. And I guess that this part of the story could be deemed a comedy scene. Saul trying to get David to wear the armour. He doesn't believe that David can live up to the promise he makes in verse 32 to fight Goliath. Saul thinks David needs protection, with the results that we know. We would probably have been glad for a bit of armour, but David is confident that he doesn't need it. And again, we ask, where does that confidence come from? Well, it goes back to his experience as a shepherd when he rescued sheep from lions and bears. But was all that a matter of skill? Well, David says not. For he says that it was God who kept him safe from those deadly animals. And it's the same God who will keep him safe from Goliath. So what gives David confidence? Well, surely it's his experience of God over the past that gives him confidence for whatever the future will bring. In short, he knows God. He has a living relationship with God. He has known God to be faithful in the past. And what was true of David then can be true for us today. I hope that we can testify to the goodness of God in the past and the way that he gives us confidence for now and the future. The reality of a relationship with God, a God that we know as our friend, a God that we can talk to, a God that we know loves us. Well, that's something that's vital in facing the challenges of the future with confidence. But of course, that's not the whole story. Our trust on God is not just based on our experience, but our experience of the faithfulness of God plays an important part in our confidence of him to be at work today. It did for David, and it should for us. And finally, in verses 40 to 51, comes the gory bit. But first, the stones. David takes 5 stones from the stream. Now, this wasn't because he was less than confident that God's plan would work first time, but probably because we understand that Goliath had 4 brothers, and David may have had to fight them too. Now, Goliath doesn't sound like a nice person, and David actually gives as good as he gets. But again, where does that confidence come from? Well, it's not from himself, but it's from God. Yes, David has got to hurl the stone, but it is God who will give him the victory. The battle is the Lord's. David is confident in the supreme power of God, a power greater than any soldier. And David, of course, is proved right. Goliath is killed with the stone to the forehead. His own sword is used to slice his head off, and the Philistine army makes itself scarce quite quickly. David had been confident in the power of God, and that confidence was shown to be well placed. Confidence in the power of God is something that we can have today. And in the New Testament, that power is seen in other ways. The feeding of 5,000, the healing of the sick, in the control that Jesus has over weather, yes, and in many others. But the place where God's power is seen most is in a man who died on a piece of wood outside an ancient city. Paul calls Jesus Christ crucified the power of God. How was that powerful? Well, it was powerful because it was on the cross that Jesus did something that no one else could do. He was taking on himself all the pain and wrongdoing of this world. This self-giving death would create the possibility for all people to have a living relationship with God. And to tap into that power is to know the gift of life in Jesus. It's to be forgiven, loved. It's to have a new start. And we all have the opportunity to place our confidence in the power of God. The message from David is not to put our trust in ourselves as Goliath did, but in what God can do through you. Don't seek praise for yourself, but for God. And we, like David, need to have confidence in our experience of God and the power of God. God, who has promised, is faithful. And we need to think of the picture of the power of God in Jesus dying on the cross in order that we might be set free. This is the heart of the Christian faith that changes lives today. May that be your experience. May God bless you not only today, but in the coming week and until we're able to meet together again. God bless you.